Very good evening to all of you. This is the first event organized by the Law Students Association of Sri Lanka. Therefore, I would like to take this time to wish each and every one of you a very happy and a prosperous new year ahead on behalf of the Law Students Association of Sri Lanka. It is my honor to take you through this very special and prestigious occasion of the virtual remembrance of His Excellency Judge C.G. Weeramantry. Today marks the 4th date anniversary of the late judge. Therefore, we pay tribute to him. His work and his efforts will remain immortal. His Excellency Christopher Gregory Weeramantry was born on the 17th November 1926 in Colombo, Ceylon, where he was educated at the Royal College, Colombo. He was a senior prefect, editor of the Royal College magazine, chairman, senior literary association, and won many classes of school prizes. Judge Weeramantry occupies a very prominent position when considering the legal arena. His experiences, his contributions speak volumes. These factors do not merely limit his services to a domestic Sri Lankan context, but goes far beyond to reach the wider global community in addressing global issues and contributing towards world peace, which undoubtedly makes him a universal icon. His invaluable efforts as a law professional, judicial, academic, arbitral, and a legal author is monumental. Hence, he was awarded many accolades and awards throughout his life. Some of the noteworthy awards being the Honorary Award of Sri Lanka Abhimanya, the Pride of Sri Lanka, which is one of the highest national honors a Sri Lankan can receive, awarded by the President of Sri Lanka, and UNESCO Peace Education Prize, which he was awarded on the year 2006 in recognition of his commitment and concrete undertakings in support of the concept and culture of peace through his career, and the Alternative Nobel Prize, Right Livelihood Award, and the Lifetime Achievement Award of the Nuclear Age Peace Foundation. He was also the Vice President of the International Court of Justice, where he delivered many key judgments. One of such judgment being the dissenting opinion, the International Court of Justice, advisory opinion of the legality of the threat of use of nuclear weapons, which still contributes in deciding many existing international law conflicts. As such, to enlighten all of us on the life story of the judge, we have a distinguished panel present here today who have generously volunteered to give us their respective insights and share their personal experiences with His Excellency Judge C.G. Weeramantry. Unfortunately, President's Counsel Mr. Kalinga Inatissa could not make it today due to a personal matter. However, the panelists present here today are Ms. Suhanya Joseph Diseram, Dr. Kalana Senaratne, Attorney at Law, and Attorney at Law, Mr. Neshan Gunasekara. Thereby, to deliver, getting directly into the proceedings, to deliver the welcome speech, I would like to welcome Sajini Wickramasinghe, the President of the Law Students Association of Sri Lanka, to deliver the welcome speech. Sajini, over to you.
Thank you, Shakib. A very good evening to all of you. And today we are having the remembrance of His Excellency, the Judge C.G. Weeramantry. And it is an event very special to us, and it is an event which is very close to our hearts. Even though we haven't actually met the judge and worked with him and even spoken with him, we still hold him very close to us because he's our patron. He's the patron of the Law Students Association of Sri Lanka. And he established the Law Students Association in 2009, 1st of September. And he also connected us to the Asian Law Students Association, South Asian country, to be a part of the Asian Law Students Association. And it is a huge opportunity for all the law students of the country. So all that credits and gratitude goes to the judge for the service that he had done to the, not only to the legal fraternity, but also to the law students community. So today we have an esteemed panel who have worked with the judge, who have talked with the judge, who has been with the judge to celebrate Judge Veeramantry's life and his work and his existence simply. And we have, unfortunately, President's Counsel Kalinda Indrathisa won't be able to join with us today due to unforeseen circumstances. However, I warmly welcome Mr. Nishan Gunasekara, who is a former director of Weeramantry International Center for Peace Education and Research. He was a director from 2007 to 2013. And Ms. Suhanya Joseph Diseram, we warmly welcome you. She's currently working at UNICEF and she interned at the Judge Veeramantry. And then we have Dr. Kalana Senaratna. He's a lecturer in law at University of Peradeniya, and he was a former researcher of Veeramantry Center for Peace, Justice, and International Law. We have such an esteemed panel. So I also warmly welcome everyone who is with us today, joining us through a Facebook live stream. Let's celebrate the life of Judge C.J. Veeramantry. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Sajini Vikram Singh, for that speech. Our first speaker for today would be Dr. Kalana Senaratne, Attorney at Law. Dr. Kalana Senaratne is a senior lecturer at the Department of Law for the University of Peradeniya. He holds a PhD in international law from the University of Hong Kong. He was a researcher at the Weeramantry International Center for Peace, Education, and Research from the years 2003 to the year 2005. His article, Judge C.T. Weeramantry, an alternative reading, was published in the Indian Journal of International Law in the year 2017. Dr. Kalana, so over to you.
Thank you, Shakib. I hope you can hear me. I'll begin by thanking the LSA of Sri Lanka and Shakib in particular for contacting me and for inviting me to this very important and special occasion and event. When you asked me to talk about Judge Veeramantry, I couldn't say no, especially because of the place that Judge Veeramantry holds in my heart, as well as the hearts of many of us who knew him. And I consider him to be one of my early mentors, certainly, because I started working with him in 2003, soon after I finished my first year as an LLB London student. And what has been most striking about Judge Veeramantry to me is actually two factors, a combination of two factors. Firstly, I think he was, as you all know, a remarkable intellectual. And the amount of work that he had done, the places he has reached as a jurist, as a scholar, and also the breadth of his work was staggering. And it's precisely because of that that I consider him to be the foremost Sri Lankan jurist. It's not that there aren't Sri Lankan jurists who have written a lot on the law, but I think there's no one who has gone through or has worked on so many themes as Judge Veeramantry has done. So that was one. He was a remarkable intellectual in that sense. But coupled with that was the fact that he was an extremely humble and gentle human being. And I think it was this latter point which really attracted me because that combination is very rare today. We see a lot of people in various professions, including our own profession, of course, people who are less, with less achievements, would not sort of act and react in the way, in the mild and gentle way that he does, or he did. So that was what remains in my mind, this gentle giant who was a star figure in the international sort of legal community. And it was during those years that I worked with him that I got to see him in action. And what I learned more than principles of international law and so on is how the person really worked, how he went about his work. and his approach to the members in the family, the people who worked with him, and all the others whom he met in the course of his life. My aim today is to very briefly discuss two themes which emerge from his work out of the 100 or so themes that one can think of. And to point out how relevant these themes are to those of us in Sri Lanka today. Because I think, and I think the wider point that I'm trying to make here in doing so is to make Judge Weeramantry relevant to Sri Lanka. Because there is this tendency in all of us, I think, to consider him to be this international superstar, someone who talked about international law, who was on the International Court of Justice. And there's a sense that, you know, he was removed from Sri Lanka, that his work was also not so related to many of the things that were happening in Sri Lanka. But I think that was not so. He was very much a person who was interested in Sri Lankan affairs and someone who commented on Sri Lankan issues as well. And I think that point perhaps needs to be raised because a younger audience would do well to revisit some of his work and see how relevant they would be to Sri Lanka in particular. The first theme is, of course, human rights. And that theme is very popular, very prominent in his work. He wrote numerous books. I think most of his books talk about human rights or related to human rights. He talked about religion and rights. He talked about the impact of science and technology on human rights. He wrote about apartheid, the nuclear weapons issue and how it impacted on the lives of the people, environmental rights, and so on. So most of his work, especially internationally, focused on human rights. But he was also someone who talked about the Sri Lankan human rights issue. And one of his early writings, not much, and that's a point that I think needs to be stressed. His writings on Sri Lanka and human rights were not so extensive, but one of his early writings, which remained, I think, his prominent work on Sri Lanka and human rights, was a piece that he published, a pamphlet kind of thing that came out in 1984, which was titled The New Human Rights Dispensation for Sri Lanka. And this was actually the text of a speech that he delivered. And this was delivered in the context of the 1983 July riots, the anti-Tamil pogrom that took place. And what's interesting about this paper is that he talked about the problems associated with this Tamil pogrom, and also he came up with the argument that a strong human rights framework was the answer to the ethnic problem that was emerging at that time in Sri Lanka. And also in the course of the presentation, he promoted a number of things which were interesting. Firstly, he talked about the importance of recognizing not just civil and political rights, but also economic and social rights. And that debate is very much present even today. He talked about the importance of taking note of international jurisprudence and learning from those developments, both internationally and the comparative examples. And he was never afraid to say that we should adopt or learn from different countries or different jurisdictions. He also was, I think, ahead of his time, and he talked about the importance of a National Human Rights Commission. And this was in 1984, and the National Human Rights Commission was established in 1996. So 12 years before the establishment, Judge Weeramantry had talked about it, which is why I say that he was perhaps ahead of his time in talking about these issues. He also talked about the importance of an equal opportunities board, anti-discrimination legislation, and so on. Why is this relevant? I think it's relevant because we are continuing to face a number of human rights challenges today in Sri Lanka. There are individuals from all communities who are facing such problems. There are problems with the independence of human rights institutions. There are concerns that relate to lawyers' rights being violated. And so many problems are still around with us. And also, I think if one looks at the Sri Lankan situation somewhat critically, I think you'll find that not much has changed, especially in terms of our mental attitude or approach that we take towards human rights. Judge Weeramantry, since I think 2005 or since 2000 when he left the ICJ, he talked about human rights in Sri Lanka on two occasions. One was in 2005 when he came out with a book on Sri Lanka, and the other was in 2010 when he presented himself before the LLRC, the Lessons Learned and Reconciliation Commission. He talked about the Sri Lankan human rights issue very briefly, but what he did was he pointed out his 1984 paper. And I think that was a very interesting Weeramantrian way in which he sort of tried to imply that many of the problems that he saw in the 1980s had not been, I think, addressed even now. So he didn't sort of, he didn't go to critique the governments since the 80s, but I think he made his point somewhat clear and very diplomatically. And also, we are now in the stage of going through a constitutional reform process. And I think learning from Judge Weeramantry or going through his writings on human rights would perhaps revive in us, in the youth in particular, those who are watching, especially law students, this interest to come up with recommendations, your observations, and critique about how the Sri Lankan human rights situation and mechanism can be improved. So I think that's one point that I want to make. And I think we can also be mindful of the systemic challenges that exist in Sri Lanka with regard to human rights issues. Judge Weeramantry was not a serious critique of the state in particular, and that I think that point needs to be made. I made this point elsewhere, but I think there's no harm in highlighting it. Judge Weeramantry was very diplomatic. He didn't want to, I think, point fingers at any government or the state in particular, but I think we can do better. The learning from Judge Weeramantry means making an attempt to sort of improve ourselves and improve our critique, and perhaps we can point out how systemic some of these human rights violations are in Sri Lanka. The second point, very briefly, is this point about interreligious and intercultural understanding and education. Judge Weeramantry was a great believer in interreligious understanding, intercultural harmony, and he was, I think, a genuine friend, more than any of us, of these different cultures and religions that existed, not only in Sri Lanka, but in the world at large. And a great part of his work was, I think, dedicated towards promoting this idea of intercultural harmony. And I think since 2000, when he left the ICJ, it was this theme that really animated his work to a great extent. Whatever he wrote, he had to make a connection to this particular issue. And his interest in religion and culture is very much present when you go through his work, his judgments, and even many of his books. So much so that I think a lot of people sometimes thought that, he wrote about Buddhism and international law, and some people even thought that he was a Buddhist, whereas he was a Christian. So that was the kind of image that he had. No one was able to sort of figure out what his ethnicity or what his, at least his religious sort of beliefs were, because he was a true friend of, I think, most of these religions. And a book that is quoted very widely by international scholars as well as domestic or local politicians, in particular from the Muslim community, is his book on Islamic jurisprudence. So why do we need to sort of revisit this point that Judge Weeramantry is making? I think it's because we are seeing the problems of not taking that message seriously in Sri Lanka. We, I think, are setting ourselves up these days to another significant clash, unfortunately, between the majority community and the minority communities, especially the Islamic or the Muslim community. Something that Judge Weeramantry would have taken very seriously if he was with us today. When you take some of these policies that are adopted by various governments, you see the problems, you see the lack of empathy and the lack of concern that many people have shown many actors have shown within the state towards other communities, other minority religions and cultural groups. So I think we need to revisit Judge Weeramantry's message on intercultural and interreligious understanding. It's not simply about tolerating others, but also about celebrating the diversity and pluralism, I think, that Sri Lanka showcases in a sense. And I think it's also important for us to know that we should speak out whenever possible about these issues, because that is what I think Judge Weeramantry, in his own fashion, in his own style, did when he was alive. So if we can do that, I think we would be truly celebrating Judge Weeramantry's work and the spirit of his work. And with that, Shakib, I'll end my speech here, thanking you and the LSA again for this very wonderful and kind invitation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Attorney at Law, Mr. Karana Senaratne. Thank you, sir, for that very valuable insight on Judge C.G. Weeramantry. And we head over to our second speaker for today, Ms. Suhanya Joseph Deseram. She's a graduate from the Paris Institute of Political Science with a Bachelor of Arts in Politics and Governance. Completed an exchange year at University College London at the Arts and Sciences Department. She focused on the social policy and international legal systems and completed her thesis on educational inequalities in the Sri Lankan school system as a result of poor policymaking. Currently, she is undertaking a graduate internship at UNICEF Sri Lanka in the social policy section. She's also a passionate individual in tackling issues that exist in the process of policy and lawmaking in Sri Lanka. Madam, over to you.
Thank you to the Law Students Association of Sri Lanka for organizing this. And thank you for inviting me to speak at this commemoration. And also good evening to all the extremely distinguished panelists who I'm so honored and humbled to speak alongside, and to everyone listening to this virtual commemoration. I'd first just like to begin by stating that I'm not a lawyer. I've never studied law and I don't have an illustrious legal background like perhaps most of you here listening to this, and most certainly the other members of this panel. But I was asked to speak at this commemoration of my own experiences with Judge Weeramantry and the profound influence he has had on me as a young student. I interned for him in 2015. I was 17 years old at the time doing my A-levels. And I would go to his home every week and assist him with taking down notes, penning down his essays, and compiling them into several short books of essays on various different topics that would interest him. Some were on the relationship of religion and the law. Some were on comparative legal thought. It just went on. But more than that, I would also spend my time just speaking with him and his wife, Rosemary, talking to him about his life. He would ask me about my life and about numerous other topics. And this was a very typical day that I would have with the judge. So not only would he want to fulfill his daily intellectual pursuits, as he used to call them, but he'd also make sure to take the time to reflect and enjoy the simpler things in life and just have a conversation with whoever was around him. I think I can speak for almost all of us who have had the pleasure of knowing Judge Weeramantry when I say that he was truly one of the kindest, most welcoming, and most remarkable human beings. He didn't care if you were the most esteemed legal mind in the country, or if you were just a slightly confused high school student, such as myself at the time. He always spoke to and treated everyone as his equal. And he used to often say that he stands to gain as much from listening to a young person as that young person stood to gain from listening to an older, more experienced person such as himself. And this is not a statement one would normally expect from a person as accomplished as himself. He always treated me with respect and always asked for my opinions on theories and judgments and cases. And that is something that has truly stuck with me, because it's not every day that a person as successful and as accomplished as he was would care to ask what I thought. And in this sense, he was truly an extraordinary person. I was incredibly grateful to get the opportunity to intern with Judge Weeramantry, through one of his dear friends and colleagues, Mahesh, who thought it would be an enriching experience for me. I still remember the night before the first time I was to be introduced to Judge Weeramantry. I had known about the judge for quite some time, and I was very much in awe of all his work, from his time at the ICJ to his sustained fight against nuclear disarmament. Just the thought of being able to see and speak to him in real life was, to simply put it, terrifying. I remember poring over Google, reading up on as many famous legal judgments and cases and theories, trying to give myself a sort of Law 101 crash course, if you will, just to prepare myself to meet him. And I was ready for what I thought would be the scariest legal confrontation of my life. And I couldn't have been more wrong. Judge Weeramantry had the most wonderful way of making everyone he spoke to feel like a friend. He was humble and modest, and he never let anyone in the room feel insignificant or lesser. He was soft-spoken, but firm, and very meticulous with his work. He also loved to help people, be it through imparting advice, as he did countless times to me, or through fighting for human rights and ethics through his legal work. And I think it's these wonderful characteristics, such as these, that make him remembered as not just a legal giant, but also as a wonderfully caring and thoughtful human being. Throughout my internship, not only would he give me advice about my academics and my future career plans, but he would also give me advice and mentor me in navigating the pitfalls of becoming a young adult. I remember very vividly 2 pieces of advice he wanted me and other young people in my generation to know. 1, always strive to do good in whatever you choose to do. And 2, all good things will take time. I think Judge Weeramantry exemplified this advice. Throughout his life, he would always strive to use his talent and ambition to do good in the world. I'm sure all of us here know the impact he has had both in Sri Lanka and internationally in changing the way people perceive the law, especially in his work against nuclear arms and his work on human rights. He would often tell me that there was no point in him being in the legal profession if he didn't use his position and abilities to better the law and its implementation. Judge Weeramantry was a person of integrity and had a strong moral code, and tried as much as he could to impart this onto other people to prevent the abuse and misuse of the law. He cared greatly that the law should be a place of refuge and justice, and not a system of oppression to those not in the majority. He believed in fairness, democratic ideals, and also in the power of the humanities in inspiring people to do good. And he lived his life as an example of this. His second piece of advice, that all good things will take time, is especially pertinent to me. A characteristic that I see in both myself and most people in my generation is that we are all engaged in a continuous sort of rat race to achieve as much as possible in as little time as possible. And so we are intent on hitting certain academic and professional milestones before the age of 25, and then 30, 35, so on and so forth. And this incredibly toxic and pressurizing way of thinking is something that the judge always warned me against. And I remember how he used to chuckle at how young and naive I was, and very gently break it to me that anything of quality will and must take time. I try as much as possible to live by this advice that Judge Weeramantry has given me. He was a mentor and a friend, and his words and actions have certainly inspired and guided me to where I am today. He has also inspired me to approach every task and goal with the same degree of focus and effort, no matter how small it is. I still remember one day when he once offered to read and edit a school essay of mine, proving that no task was too small and insignificant for him. And this is at the same time that he was focusing on his own literature. He has also inspired me, and countless others, no doubt, to uphold the law with integrity and fairness and ensure justice to all. Not only did Judge Weeramantry care greatly about law, but he was also a lifelong supporter of the arts and humanities, and always took a multidisciplinary approach to his own judgments, life, or daily activities. I am truly so grateful to have had the opportunity to intern and learn from Judge Weeramantry's wealth of experience. He has inspired me to apply his philosophy of always doing good in my own academic and future professional life in public policy. And his guidance has pushed me to reach for more goals in the future. Interning with Judge Weeramantry was not only an incredibly enriching academic and professional experience, but also an opportunity to get to know and learn from an incredibly remarkable human being. Thank you. Thank you to the Law Students Association, and thank you also to the esteemed panel for indulging my presence. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Ms. Suhanya Diseran, for that heartfelt speech. We go to our final speaker for today, the attorney at law, Mr. Nishan Gunasekara. Mr. Nishan Gunasekara is an educationist, coach, facilitator, and an international lawyer. He was the director of the Weeramantry International Center for Peace, Education, and Research from the year 2007 to the year 2013. He received His Excellency Judge C.G. Weeramantry International Justice Award in recognition of his services and continuing contributions in the fields of peace, justice, sustainable development, and protecting the rights of current and future generations. Mr. Gunasekara has worked in a variety of roles, including in national and international civil service, supporting numerous organizations, including the United Nations agencies such as UNESCO, UNDP, UNODC, UNFPA, and IOM, and the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. He was also the director of the International Association of Lawyers Against Nuclear Arms, and he was the co-chair of the Earth Trusteeship Initiative. Sir, the forum is yours.
Thank you, Shakib, for that kind introduction. Always a pleasure to be on a respected panelist with Dr. Kalana Senarat and Ms. Sarana Diseram. And ladies and gentlemen, of course, going last, I might be echoing similar sentiments that Dr. Senarat and Suhanya kindly shared about Judge Weeramantry. But I must always share that it is an honor and a privilege to speak on the life and work of His Excellency Judge Christopher Weeramantry, former judge and vice president of the ICJ and founder chairman of the Weeramantry International Center, which we in short call WICPA. So let me begin by saying thank you very much to Ms. Nikita Gomez from the Academic Activities Committee for the kind invitation to me, President Ms. Sajani Vikramasinghe and Shakib Yu and the full team from the Law Students Association for putting this together. And it is most encouraging to see that all of you, through the Law Students Association of Sri Lanka, continuing to uphold its founding values as set out in the preamble of the Law Students Constitution that requires dedicated effort and action for the wider social responsibility that is bestowed on all of us as students of the law. I'm happy to have played a very small part during the setting up of the Law Students Association back in 2009, and hence privy to the constitutional provisions, but also more importantly, connected to the wider work with the patron of His Excellency Judge Weeramantry. So I think two speakers before me also said this, but just to repeat that if Judge Weeramantry was here with us today, he would be very proud of each and every one of you for your continuing efforts and the journey that all of you have embarked upon during perhaps one of the most turbulent times for both the legal and judicial professions, not just in Sri Lanka, but elsewhere in the world, but also our kind of responsibility to the wider community of life. So I've chosen a couple of points on sharing anecdotes with you throughout my time working as director of WICPA. But let me begin by reciting a short poem by Judge Weeramantry, and then invite all of you, all of us, to reflect on the message he is attempting to deliver through this poem, and then at the end, maintain a 1-minute silence in respect of Judge Weeramantry and his life and work. So the poem is titled Building a Future World of Global Justice by C.G. Weeramantry. I quote, "We live at a most crucial stage of man's sojourn on planet Earth, when wondrous vistas open up of great new eras taking birth, of eras when all strife is stilled and peace and justice reign supreme, of eras when uplifting thoughts of global welfare set the theme, of happiness and care for all without divides of race or caste, of color, creed, or sex or tribe, which all are banished to the past. Such are the prospects opening up, unveiled by science, knowledge, law, which unify the human race in ways our forebears never saw. We must all seize this golden chance of building better worlds to come, worlds where these blessings flow to all, reach everyone from pole to pole, world where concerns of peace and justice always lay the leading role. We must not waste this golden chance and miss this prospect bright and fair. Let us illuminate our world and banish dull despair. End quote. Can I now call on everyone to maintain 1 minute silence in respect and connect at the end? Thank you. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. So, turning to the topic that I've selected today, which was kind of carefully constructed after a number of discussions with the academic committee, I selected the topic, A Walk to Remember with His Excellency Judge C.G. Weeramantry. Of course, this is to make personal reflections on some of the key highlights during the time I worked with him as director of the Weeramantry International Center. I again fully endorse the insights and thoughts and memories that both Ms. Deseram and Dr. Senaratna shared. So let me begin with the first anecdote and connect a lesson that Judge Weeramantry has left me and through me to my generation and the next, I hope. So the first anecdote takes us back almost 14 years to March 2007, where a group called the Judicial Integrity Group, which was chaired by Judge Weeramantry and comprising of a number of very senior chief justices from all parts of the world, had gathered at the United Nations office in Vienna. The purpose of this meeting was to negotiate and adopt something called the Commentary on the Bangalore Code of Judicial Ethics. Now, I was privileged to have accompanied Judge Weeramantry to this meeting, and this is where I had the chance occasion of having a one-on-one discussion with Justice Pius Lanka. Now, Justice Pius Lanka, by the time, was a legendary former Chief Justice of the Constitutional Court of South Africa, and we were discussing the wider judicial profession, and specifically got to the topic of the contributions made by Judge Weeramantry. And this is what Justice Pius Lanka had to share with me. He told me that there are heroes and that there are superheroes in our lives. And there are Judge Weeramantries of our world who sits above them all. Of course, I was quick to agree with him because by this time I was awestruck and inspired by the work and legacy of Judge Weeramantry, but also wanted to dig a bit deeper as to why Justice Lanka had this opinion. So I asked him, why, Justice Lanka, why do you say this? And he continued to engage me and say, what matters, Nishan, above all achievements in a person's life is the person's ability to remain humble and show humility with all achievements. And in this way, Judge Weeramantry epitomized both these qualities, and this is an inspiration to me. Now, this is coming from one of the senior most Chief Justices who has contributed much to transformative constitutional law on the planet. with every anecdote, there is a backstory. So let me pick one backstory with regard to this anecdote that I just shared with you. So as some of you may already know, and Judge Weeramantry was one of the very few people who were allowed to travel to South Africa during the period of apartheid and conduct his own research on his own terms. Two of the reasons that Judge Weeramantry said that he was allowed to do this was, A, he was a highly respected Roman Dutch law jurist, and second, that by this time, which was 1980, he had published one of the kind of the widely acclaimed books on the legal profession titled The Law in Crisis. Subsequent to his period of research at the University of Stellenbosch, he published the book. It was called Apartheid, the Closing Phases in 1980, which was in Australia. Immediately, as you would have guessed, it was banned in apartheid South Africa. But very interestingly, this manuscript was, he said it was put into a microfilm and smuggled inside a pen into South Africa and later published. And Justice Lanka, having read this book, had this message sent across. He said, I quote, "At a time when South Africa was still in the throes of its unhappy past, the Honorable Mr. Justice Weeramantry wrote prophetically, Apartheid, the closing phases. Those were indeed the closing chapters of apartheid," end quote. So in this way, ladies and gentlemen, Judge Weeramantry was a visionary and articulated his vision through clear illustrations of legal principles. And this was supported by wisdom found in our indigenous system, cross-cultural and religious traditions and learning. And I think you heard through the messages from both Dr. Senaratne and Suhanya earlier, one of the most astounding abilities and skills that Judge had was his deep understanding and appreciation of our common humanity. So when he illustrated and interpreted principles of law, he was able to bring to bear all this wisdom from these different traditions and cultures. And it's incredible to have been part of these discourses almost day in, day out throughout the period at WICPA. Now, let me again quickly take you back to kind of the year 2002, which is now almost 2 decades ago, where I consider the beginning of my walk with Judge Weeramantry. So we were first-year law students and had just completed national rounds and was selected to participate in the Jessup Moot Court competition that year. And during our preparations, we were told by our law lecturers of the time that Judge Weeramantry was in town in Colombo. So just try to reach out to him because he's probably the best person to give you guidance and advice on how to prepare. We were lucky. He was in town, I remember, for like a period of like 1 week before he was traveling again. And we called him in the last moment, like 2 days or something before he was leaving the country. And this gentleman gave us a time to meet him. So, you know, as wide-eyed, first-year law students, when we walked into his office, we were immediately kind of struck by the clarity and the eloquence in which Judge spoke to us and kind of simplified very heavy international legal jargon and principles and precedents. Mind you, myself and most of my colleagues in that team hadn't studied international law at this time, and we were trying to read text. But in the 15-20 minutes he engaged us, he was able to break down international law into simple terms that we understood. And that was the first element of what struck me when I met him for the first time. And the second one was, I think Suhanya also mentioned this, is the time he took to explain it to us. We would have several questions. He would not be rushed. He would take the time and engage us, saying that it is an important question, and he would take time to explain. And I'm also thinking, we are mere first-year law students, and he has this great legendary jury speaking to us, and he was so calm, so respectful of us. And this is what inspired me that day when I was walking out of his office, that not only was he wonderful and legendary jurist, but he was a humanist par excellence. And I think this was little did I know, but this was the first lesson that he taught us, the lesson on humility. And this later on, reflecting back today, was perhaps one of the main reasons that I decided to resign from my office in at the official bar and join him as the director of the center. Now, the second story I want to uh, share with you is something very personal, and it has a lesson which is engulfed in these words, which says, "Laugh often and always have a smile on your face." Now, let me explain this lesson. So, let me take all of you listening into early morning into Judge Weeramantry's office, and as most of you who had worked there would recall, even sometimes before you enter the office, you most of the time hear a beautiful, cheerful, bubbly, and infectious laughter. And this would come from Mrs. Rosemary Weeramantry, the loving wife of Judge Weeramantry. So Mrs. Weeramantry, it doesn't matter what time, early morning we would go to the office, she would catch on to some interesting news item or recent development in the political life or general aspect of our day-to-day life, and would apply some humor to it. And she will have everyone in the room, including Judge Weeramantry, laughing. And this would kind of be the first greeting of the day. This positive energy really resonated within all of us. I think little did we know at the time, this energy will stay with us for the rest of our lives. And this lady, who was wonderful in all her ways, taught us in numerous ways the importance of love and respect. These are the two killers, kind of the two key pillars on which any solid foundation for life should be built on, and that this is something we took away on a day-to-day basis. And what would follow this greeting was this wonderfully warm and gentle reciprocating smile of Judge Weeramantry. So at this time, the room is full of energy, and we are ready to take on any challenges thrown at us and to make the world a better place, because it was truly, truly wonderful. And they also showed us the importance of working in a team. And both Judge Weeramantry and Mrs. Weeramantry uh, find numerous ways to kind of sit us down, especially if we are stressed over some work or some engagement, to explain what is more important and take some time to smile and have a laugh and take it easy. I think that's something very important for us as we get into a stressful world of the legal profession, to not lose out on the bigger picture of what values that we carry. So in Judge Weeramantry's own words, in reference to Mrs. Weeramantry in the memoirs, if I may quote, he says, "A happy marriage is truly a tremendous asset to a person pursuing a professional career." And he says, "In this respect, I was truly blessed." And if any one of you us is to take the memoirs in its 3 volumes and look at it, you will find that the beginning or the initial chapters of each of the 3 volumes is dedicated to home and family. And this is something very, very important. In my own part, I'm, like to share this with the younger audience. I was very happy to kind of contribute last year to kind of framing the title of the first international fellowship, which is now called Judge C.G. and Rosemary Weeramantry International Fellowship. So getting on to kind of the final anecdote and the lesson that Judge Weeramantry has left us, I wanted to focus on one of his final publications that I had the honor of working with him in 2009, which was titled Treading Lightly on Our Earth. And I believe Dr. Senaratne very nicely brought together his importance of cross-cultural understanding, interfaith dialogue. And in this publication, he went to the extent of connecting to one of the other themes that he used to work on, is to bring the world wisdom within these traditional systems, within customary principles of international law. And this was the message he left us, that we are trustees of the planet, that we do not own anything, that we owe a responsibility to each other and the common human future and life on the planet. So as trustees, we needed to walk this path. And it was important to understand and realize our duties and responsibilities. And for those who have been lucky enough, I think that Weeramantry, during the week's time, he used to go for walks from time to time. This actually was his form of exercise. He loved walking, and he walked quite fast. For those who have walked with him, you'll know he walked exceptionally fast. So we would start the first couple of minutes alongside him, and within few seconds, he'll be like yards ahead of us. And mind you, here's a gentleman who's 75 plus, and we were all in our early 20s, and we were trying to keep up with him. He walked very fast. But during this fascinating walk, especially I remember going down to the golf face green, where he would really connect with his past, especially his childhood, because his parents used to take him for walks at the golf face green. And he would tell us these wonderful stories of a time that, you know, perhaps most of the people listening to this event might not recollect, because it was a period way before the Second World War, way before Sri Lanka gained its independence, and even the United Nations being established. But the fact that he was able to relate some of these stories and then connect it to some of his experience in the World Court and share that with, you know, a bunch of law students who are going to, for this walk with him, allowed us an opportunity to look at the past, connect it to the present, and see through Judge Weeramantri's eyes this vision that he had for a future of peace. Now, that is, I think, one of the most important things that we could learn by probably going back to his written work, his fantastic judicial precedents, whether it's in the Supreme Court in Sri Lanka or the World Court or various writings that he has done, and try to understand it in this, you know, past, present, and future, because he always had a wonderful program of action that we attempted to bring to light through the work at WICPA. And finally, I think Judge Weeramantry has made numerous contributions to building a peaceful future. I think Dr. Senaratne mentioned the dissenting opinion in the illegality of nuclear weapons case. And to this July in 2021, it will be 25 years since that very important judgment, which inspired number of lawyers and scientists and youth activists from various parts of the world. And to give credit to that wonderful achievement 25 years ago, you know, for example, on the 22nd of January this year, we have what is called the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons Convention being formally adopted. Now, 80-odd countries have signed this on. Now, we must dig deeper to find out how the wonderful wisdom set out by Judge Weeramantry 25 years ago gave rise to this kind of momentum 25 years later. Of course, it doesn't end there. The fight to rid the world of nuclear weapons continues. It is high time that we also take note of these efforts and see how best we can connect it to the wider social responsibility and responsibility towards the planet that we have as future lawyers. Now, I think, can I, Shakib, how many times? 5 minutes more?
Oh, sir, yes.
Okay, thanks, Shakib. I think, Shakib, you mentioned, I think, all the awards that Judge Weeramantry has received, and I see wonderful slides that you all have put together and posted on Facebook. So thank you for doing that. It's fascinating. But I think what I wanted to share with you, Shakib, and the rest, is that each of these recognitions and awards has a wonderful story behind it. And I think I'll pick one or two. I'm not privy to all of the stories, but for example, you mentioned the UNESCO Peace Education Prize. It's a very prestigious award, and Judge Weeramantry was recognized for his wonderful work over the years. But the story behind it is the largest school on the planet, which is considered as the CMS school in Lucknow, had almost close to 30,000 students sign a petition putting Judge Weeramantry as the candidate for the UNESCO Peace Award. And that story is a fascinating story. And here's, a massive village, over 30,000 kids coming together, putting this petition and sending it to Paris, and having these huge hoardings of Judge Weeramantry and petitioning, saying, this is a person we recognize as the future and who will look after us in the future, and we recognize for his services. So I think that's a wonderful story that connects the UNESCO Prize for Peace Education. And a year later, in 2007, he received the Right Livelihood Award, also known as the Alternative Nobel Prize, which was given to him for his lifelong commitment to the ideas of peace and justice and the international rule of law. And a year later, he was awarded the Lifetime Achievement Award by the Nuclear Peace Foundation. But perhaps little known amongst the many recognitions and accolades he received, and I thought I would mention this today, is when the city of Hague celebrated its 750th anniversary in the year 1996. It selected 18 areas in which it had excelled over the centuries and one personality to represent each and every one of these sectors. The personality selected to represent the Hague's excellence in international justice was Judge C.G. Weeramantry. So this is another fascinating story, and how Judge Weeramantry's work, life, and legacy is connected deeply to the international city of peace and justice, The Hague. And then when you're pursuing your studies in international law in the future, I would really ask you all to pursue this a little bit further and to see this link between Judge Weeramantry and his work and the city of The Hague. So he continued this work in the last 10 years, as well as one of the founding counselors of the World Future Council, and through there he has now passed this kind of responsibility to all of us. It was Judge Weeramantry's vision to create that one world of peace and justice. He termed it as universalism, or universalizing international law. And as we all continue on our work and through this journey, let us now remember to laugh often and smile as much as possible and have time for each other. And efforts to contribute this one world that Judge Weeramantry wished for all of us. And that one day we will reach this destination of universal peace and love. Let me conclude with a message from Ubuntu philosophy, which says, I am who I am because of who we all are. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Attorney at Law, Mr. Nishan Gunasekara, for that valuable insight and memory that you shared of Judge C.G. Weeramantry. Hearing all these memorable experiences and stories that our distinguished panel really put forward, it makes us wonder as to how it would have been if we actually, as youth of today, had the honor and privilege of seeing C.G. Weeramantry in his presence, and it would be a truly remarkable experience. Yes, so I believe one of the most important and established factors that all of our distinguished panelists touched on today was that not only that His Excellency C.G. Weeramantry was a phenomenal and a humongous jurist and a judicial personality, but he was more than he was a remarkable human being. On that note, which brings us to the final item on the agenda, I would like to invite the chairperson of the Academic Activities Committee, Mr. Nitil Fernandopulle to deliver the vote of thanks. Nitil, over to you.
Thank you, Shakib. A very good evening to all of you. The 5th of January marks 4 years since the passing of His Excellency Judge C.G. Weeramantry. And on behalf of the Law Students Association of Sri Lanka, it is my privilege to deliver the vote of thanks for this annual remembrance of the late judge. I would like to express my heartfelt gratitude to our distinguished panelists present here today, Ms. Suhanya Joseph Diseram, Dr. Kalana Senaratne, Mr. Nishan Gunasekara, for sparing their invaluable time and accepting our invitation to speak a few words on the life and work of the late judge. I would like to also thank our viewers who have joined in virtually today from all around the world to celebrate the life of a legal giant. I would like to extend my appreciation to the President, Secretary, and the National Council of the Law Students Association of Sri Lanka for their continued support given to us in organizing today's remembrance. A special thanks to Ms. Nirmal Pereira and the media team headed by Ms. Senuri Jayasinghe for creating the promotional material for today's remembrance that was consistently shared on social media and for handling the event through Zoom and Facebook Live. I would like to conclude this vote of thanks on a personal note, thanking the members of the Academic Activities Committee, Ms. Dihani Amarasinghe, Ms. Nikita Gomez, and our moderator for the day, Mr. Shakib Hisham, for the continued cooperation given to us in organizing today's remembrance. Let us all live by the ideals set by the late judge in order to achieve a more free and just society. Thank you. Over to you, Shakib.
Thank you so much, Nitil. Once again, we are so very grateful to our panelists for sparing their valuable time in sharing in these insights and their personal experiences. And I want to also very specially thank each and every one of you who are participating from all across Sri Lanka and the world on this very, very prestigious and special occasion. Thank you so much, everyone, and hope you have a very pleasant evening.
Thank you. All the best. Bye.